I'm sure we'll have some latecomers as well, but that's absolutely fine. So hello everyone and welcome to our Lunch and Learn series as part of Black History Month at Queen Mary University of London. Firstly, happy Black History Month. Black History Month is an annual celebration that highlights the contributions, success and achievements of the Black community across the world. This year, the national theme is Time for Change, Action Not Words. At Queen Mary, we're proud to showcase our biggest celebration to date with a programme of events, activities, resources that are open to all of our staff and students. These talks will celebrate research contributions that focus on race, ethnicity and culture at Queen Mary. This is a great opportunity to listen, learn and get food for thought for making change that benefits us all. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. Tipu Sherif, who will be presenting towards inclusive curricula in chemistry. Dr. Sherif is a senior lecturer and director of teaching and learning in the Department for Chemistry at Queen Mary, having previously completing a BSc Chemistry, PhD and PDIA at Imperial College London. Tipu has received grants from the Royal Society of Chemistry for outreach and more recently for inclusion and diversity and has co-created with undergraduate students resources for teachers at Key Stage 5 and A-level to highlight minorities in chemistry. The aim of these resources is to enable teachers to better inspire their students, create role models and reduce attainment gaps. And in all of this, fostering a sense of belonging to enable students to see people like them reflected in the UK national curriculum. Tipu has also contributed to a number of teaching CPD training events in schools on the importance of inclusion and diversity. He is the school SPCS representative on the Faculty Wife Centre for Academic Inclusion and Science and Engineering. It's quite a mouthful, but as you can see, a great list of accreditations and so. So a few housekeeping things. If everyone can keep their microphones and cameras off whilst Tipu is presenting, and there'll be an opportunity to present questions at the end. And so without further ado, I'm going to leave Tipu to deliver his fantastic talk, which is the first of many of our Lunch and Learns. So thank you.
Thank you, Ofwe, and well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to do this presentation, and thanks for everybody who's managed to make it. I know term has begun at the universities. Life is very, very hectic, so thank you very much for making the time. I will probably speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, which should leave ample time for questions at the end, and indeed, I reckon we'll probably finish early. So let me share my slides. Okay, so just a disclaimer at the beginning. I mean, I'm actually reporting on results by through an award from the Royal Society of Chemistry. Obviously, what I present today are purely my own viewpoints on things, so none of this can be attributed to the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I just wanted to make that disclaimer clear from the beginning. As Afui said, the theme for this year's Black History Month is Time for Change, Action, Not Words. I hope that at least by the end of it, I can show that hopefully I've in some way contributed to the spirit of this of the theme this year. I want to give the talk a dedication to two sets of people. One is an individual. This is Chris Carver. You may remember that last month, in fact, on the 5th of September last month, Chris Carver was unfortunately shot dead by police. The circumstances of his death are still not clear, but it's very unfortunate. He was only 24 years old. He had the whole of his life to look forward to, and indeed he was expecting a child, or at least his partner or wife were. I'd like to contrast his death with the death of Her Majesty the Queen a few days later, which was actually on the 8th of September. There's been a lot of coverage of that, obviously, in the mainstream media. It is said the Queen passed away peacefully and had her children around her. Unfortunately, that honour was unfortunately not available to Chris Carver. Okay, so let's go into why this project is important. So this takes a report from the Royal Society of Chemistry, which used HESA data. So this is the Higher Education Statistical Agency, and this is data from 2017-18. where they were looking at different communities, different groups within society, and how they progress from undergraduate studies through to PhD studies and then to become professors. So this is in the form of donut charts. Now, I don't particularly like the categories of white and black because I think it's, it just talks about people's skin and skin color, and I don't particularly like that. So let's, for black, let me say people of an African Caribbean heritage. So if you look at the 4.8% at undergraduate level, that roughly corresponds with the census figures for the number of Afro-Caribbean heritage people in the UK, and therefore the number you would expect to enter higher education. So the overall percentage is 24.7%, but clearly we're concentrating on the purple bit of the donut. That's referring to people of Afro-Caribbean heritage. If we look at the way that then progresses to PhD studies, you notice that segment becomes a third of what it was before. So very few students from an Afro-Caribbean heritage are actually progressing on to PhD studies. And indeed, Russell Group universities, of which Queen Mary is one, are doing less well than non-Russell Group universities. In terms of gender, males are doing less well than females within the Afro-Caribbean community. And within subjects, chemistry and biology are doing less well than physics. So what I'm presenting is actually a case study primarily based on chemistry, but obviously this can be extended to other subjects as well. Not only STEM subjects, but I would suggest across other areas of the college as well, or other subject areas. If we then look to the number who go on to become professors, you notice the purple just disappears. And that's because, well, there's a bit of a story in this that HESA, for anonymity reasons, any numbers which were less than 5 or 5 and less could not be counted within the statistics because it would be against their rules on anonymity. There is in fact one Afro-Caribbean heritage professor, a chemist, who's a chemist, and that's Professor Robert Mokaya, who's at the University of Nottingham. But as far as I'm aware, he's the only one. And I would argue that one reason where students don't go beyond a first degree is they don't see examples from themselves who are in those positions, in those high positions of actually having a doctorate or becoming a professor. And so that's not something that they're looking up to try and achieve themselves. You can't be what you can't see. And as far as I'm aware, there are no Afro-Caribbean Nobel Prize winners. I can never remember whether this is within chemistry. I guess it's within chemistry, but it could be wider as well. So this is something that is of concern, and I think this is something that really needs to be addressed. If we look at QM-UL data, again, this is from some years ago, 2016-17, there seems to be an attainment gap between, again, I don't like the word white, but let's say members of the host community compared to those from a minority community. So there's a 7% difference in achievement. And 7% may not seem like a lot, but remember, it's 7 out of every 100. So that is statistically quite significant. So I always do this. I was going to ask people if they knew this particular scientist. So hopefully you didn't see what was printed at the bottom, but perhaps you did. This is, does anybody want to shout it out in case they didn't see it? Or put it in the chat. Well, this is Thomas Edison, right? Now, I'd heard of Thomas Edison. I mean, I don't want to give my age away, but I'd been, so my background is that I'm originally from India, but my father left India in the 1940s, came to the UK to study, and basically never went back. So he joined first the Merchant Navy, then he joined the British Forces Broadcasting Service. So he was sort of transferred around the world, Kenya, Libya, where I was born, Malta, where my sister was born, Cyprus, and then the UK. But wherever we were always in British schools. We were sort of, he was almost like a civil servant, and we were always placed in British schools. and we had to have British passports. So I remember the name Thomas Edison etched into my psyche from a very early age. And it was only in 2020, I was actually listening to a cricket commentary on the radio, and the commentators had to fill in some time because as often happens in this country, it was a day and night match, and unfortunately it was raining. So they had to fill in some time. Now, I'd never heard, I wonder if anybody knows this person. I won't give it away this time. Does anybody know who this is? If you know, put it in the chat or shout it out. Right. So Afoye and Katharina say they don't know. Any others? Eleanor says she doesn't know. Okay. Well, I don't blame you, because I didn't know this person either. So the commentators started talking, to fill in time, they started talking about the floodlights which were bathing the stadium, this cricket stadium. And one of the commentators said to the other, do you know that Thomas Edison is the guy who is credited for developing or inventing the light bulb? But did you know that this person, and I'll give you his name now, Lewis Howard Latimer, actually developed the carbon filament that actually made the light bulb a useful device. So Thomas Edison discovered a light bulb. The filament he used was made out of paper. The paper simply burnt up. I mean, it was in that sense, it was a useless device. It was Lewis Latimer who actually developed the carbon filament that actually made the light bulb a useful device. This was 142 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I would say, isn't it about time, 142 years later, that we recognize and the great contribution that Lewis Latimer made to the invention of the light bulb? I think it's long overdue. I'm going to ask another question. Does anybody recognize this person? There's some comments coming on the chat. Yeah, okay, so Alex says no. Don't worry, Alex. Catherine says no. Michael says no. Is that Michael or Michelle? Michael, I guess. Okay, so again, I had no idea about this person either until we started doing some research into the different contributions to chemistry from members of the let's call them overlooked community. This is actually Alice Sullivan. So Alice Sullivan is famous because she was a double graduate in chemistry. Sorry, go back to my slides again. Double graduate of chemistry and pharmacology, I think it was, but developed a cure for leprosy, which was the standard cure for leprosy until the mid-1940s. And again, I'd never heard of this person in all of my schooling within the British system. So let's take you to some activities that we actually did where we tried to find out, okay, I didn't know about them, but perhaps members of the public, perhaps people in schools were being taught about these people and we weren't aware of it. So we come to the Festival of Communities, which is an annual event now of the QMUL calendar. It's an activity that we take science and education, what the university does, out to the community. In June, June 2020 was the mid of the pandemic, so we didn't have any Festival of Communities. The year later, which was June 2021, there was nothing in the park for the same reason, but departments could organise activities within their building. So my colleague, Dr. Canello, organised some activities within the lab. And what we decided to do with some undergraduate students who are now part of this RSC project was to set up some posters, and it was like a ball game. So people coming to the laboratory would have to pass through the foyer, and we could stop them and ask them to throw a ball into a hoop if they knew who Thomas Edison was, and if they knew who Lewis Latimer was. And there was another one for Alice Ball further down the corridor. So these are some members of the public doing that and throwing the ball into the hoop. And then we simply counted up the balls at the end for each of the scientists. So if we go back to Thomas Edison, Lewis Latimer and Alice Ball, 86% of the people who took part in that, let's call it ball activity, knew of Thomas Edison. A mere 18% knew of Lewis Latimer, and only 12% knew of Alice Ball. Now, you could argue not only was Alice Ball of an Afro-Caribbean heritage, she was also female and therefore perhaps doubly disadvantaged. And that might explain the very low knowledge amongst the general public of Alice Ball. But you need, I mean, the big contrast is between Thomas Edison, let's say, male, Western, compared to Lewis Latimer, African Caribbean heritage, who's not known at all to any great extent compared to Thomas Edison. So by then we'd already started a project where I was using the database that we collected over the years in terms of my outreach activities with schools and colleges to send the schools a questionnaire. This was a questionnaire that was approved by the ethics department at Queen Mary. One of the stipulations was that it could only be used for students above the age of 18. So we could only pass the survey obviously to teachers and to year 13 students. We had about 200 responses. I think of those, 185 were legitimate in terms of the students being over 18 and or teachers. And we asked a number of questions, including their knowledge of overlooked scientists. So again, if we look at Lewis Latimer compared to Thomas Edison, again, the difference was quite stark, about a third less compared to, who knew Lewis Howard Latimer compared to Thomas Eva Edison. So that's again within the school environment. These are students who are about to leave school, so perhaps better than the general public, but still the difference is quite stark, about a third difference, between the two. We then asked as a sort of, I think the penultimate two questions were, do you think the contributions of BAME scientists are highlighted adequately in the national curriculum? A whopping 90% of our respondents said no. We then asked, do you think the national curriculum should be modified to include the contributions of BAME scientists, and whether the Royal Society of Chemistry should use its leverage to bring about this change? And again, a whopping 85% said yes, that should happen. Just to say, obviously, the national curriculum is determined by government. So government determines the content of the national curriculum, and the professional bodies like the Royal Society of Chemistry obviously do speak to government and do have a say and can leverage that change if enough, if they put enough pressure in doing that. So this is clear evidence that schools and students want this change, and that's our big project, if you like. Our big project is to try and eventually bring about this change where, let's say, overlooked scientists who are not featured currently in the national curriculum should actually be featured. So let's see why Lewis Howard Latimer should be featured. So I've mentioned before, he was an African-American inventor who patented the carbon filament. That made the light bulb a practical and affordable device for the average household and enabled its dissemination and its use throughout America and then throughout the world. Interestingly, Latimer's parents were actually slaves. They'd actually been brought from Africa as slaves. They escaped from Virginia. Lewis Howard Latimer's father was tried for being a runaway, but then was allowed to remain in Massachusetts as a free man. So what I'd like to bring home here to you is Lewis Howard Latimer came from quite a disadvantaged background. Nevertheless, despite his background, he was in the same scientific company as Hiram Maxim and indeed Thomas Edison. They were contemporaries of each other. So why is it that Thomas Edison gets all the credit for the invention of the light bulb and Latimer gets nothing, as far as I'm aware, gets no acknowledgement at all. So Latimer did other work as well in the area of applied science. So he helped patent the first telephone. And as I said before, he was actually a contemporary of Thomas Edison and worked with and for Edison. So I'm going to say a few words about slavery because I think we need to contextualize the background to this. Why are Afro-Caribbean people seemingly treated differently compared to white male Western people? And we need to say at the beginning that we need to be careful with history because there is an image that Britain comes out rather well from the slave trade. It's even thought that Britain was one of the first countries to abolish slavery. That is not correct. The first country to abolish slavery was actually Haiti. And in fact, the British fought the Haitians because they tried to abolish slavery. So I'm afraid to say that, the British involvement in slavery is not good. Should there be an apology? Absolutely, they should be. Should there be reparations? Absolutely, they should be, in my opinion. So it wasn't just Britain. Obviously, there were many other European countries involved as well. And for those who don't know, this involved the taking of manufactured goods, especially guns and weapons. And we have many analogous situations in the modern world to Africa, where obviously the guns were used for people to fight each other. In return, and remain divided, in return, slaves were taken from Africa and taken either to the Caribbean islands or to North America, where they worked on cotton fields and other plantations. The produce of that, which was then taken back to Europe for sale, and that included commodities like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. So just to say, this was a rather unsavory trade. So 30 million Africans were taken from their home. 10 million died during the capture phase. Of the 12 million Africans shipped, only 10 million made it across the Atlantic alive. So 2 million Africans died en route, and the Atlantic Ocean is a silent graveyard for those 2 million Africans. And for those who survived, the average life span in the plantations in the United States was about 8 years. So this is the culture and the background of which Lewis Howard Latimer's parents would have been in. And again, I stress again, for him then to become a leading scientist and his contributions to science is quite remarkable. In fact, we should say that he deserves perhaps more credit, that he was able to overcome all of that background and deficiency and still contribute majorly to science and technology. I'm going to have one more slide on slavery. I'm sorry about this, it's a bit depressing, but these look like matchsticks in a box. These are not matchsticks, these are actually human beings and the way they were transported across the Atlantic. This is very, very unpleasant. Even more unpleasant, if I can tell you about a particular incident called the Zong Massacre. This occurred in 1781, where 130 Africans were basically thrown overboard to die because the ship's captain thought that the ship had run out of water and they were far off from the coast. In fact, they were not far off from the coast of the Caribbean or the Americas, I can't remember which. They were mistaken, but nevertheless, they basically jettisoned some of their cargo, and their cargo was human, and that cargo was the African slaves. To add insult to injury, the ship owners then went to Lloyd's of London to claim insurance on the 130 individuals who they'd lost, who were basically just a commodity who had been thrown overboard to die, but nevertheless the owners had the audacity to claim insurance on their loss of cargo. And this led to several cases in the High Court, and was one of the reasons why slavery was eventually abolished. So, so the cities particularly to benefit from slavery were London, Bristol, and Liverpool, and also Glasgow and Scotland. And this is clearly, profit before people in a big way. Let's end this this slide with on a happy note. So these four individuals are called the Colston Four. They're from Bristol. They objected to the presence of statues of William Colston, who was a slave owner or slave director, who actually enriched Bristol a lot through that slavery, and his statues and buildings features in many places in Bristol. This was quite heavily covered in the news, so you might all remember it. So a statue of William Colston was pulled down. It was dragged through the streets and dumped in the Bristol Channel. These four individuals were instrumental, or at least identified by the police as being partly responsible for that action, and were prosecuted. In their defense, an expert witness was brought who described slavery in perhaps much more detail than I have. And these four were acquitted because it was felt, it was said by the judge that the presence of a statue of William Colston in Bristol was actually an incitement to hatred. And this is really actually quite pleasing. I know certain individuals and perhaps the government weren't very happy with these acquittals, but this is happening around the country in elite group universities like Oxford and Cambridge, where students are rebelling against the portrayal and the celebration of slave owners and the buildings and their statues. So I think this is something that's positive. So briefly, what does EDI mean? I think we're all familiar with it. It means fair treatment and equal opportunity for all. We should be aiming to eradicate prejudice and discrimination on any individual or groups of individuals based on the protected characteristics. I would argue that the current national curriculum has a legacy of colonialism, and therefore it's not inclusive. I would suggest it omits and distorts. So students from minoritized groups have no or very limited knowledge of their predecessors' achievements. I would suggest that leads to disempowerment, a lack of sense of belonging, and perhaps a lack of role models to enhance their personal well-being, their personal achievements, and them getting into prominent positions in this country. There's no, there are not many role models out there that they can follow, especially in the area of science. So what we try to do is we try to address this through this project, through this RSC funded project. So Aisha Sharif, you notice her name is mentioned, was one of the undergraduate students. The other one was Israt Zahan Chowdhury. So what Aisha did was took the English National Curriculum in chemistry at Key Stage 5, which is at A level, and picked out some key words, for example, polymerization, and then tried to find an overlooked chemist from a minority background who had actually made a contribution to that area. So we were able to identify a number of chemists / scientists, and we're able to do some research and find out about their contribution, which we then put together in forms of teacher resources. So we found initially some resources on these 6 scientists, and we started creating resources for teachers. Now, these resources took the form of posters, teacher sheets, and a 1-minute video. If I just play this 1-minute video, I'm not sure, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. So let's just see, give it a try and see. So this is Jabir ibn Hayyan, who's, well, it's all there in the script. Okay, I hope you were able to view that. So the resources included sheets like this. So Jabir ibn Hayyan was probably the first person who discovered distillation, a technique that we commonly use now in all aspects of chemistry, in undergraduate level, but also in manufacturing chemistry as well. Again, to highlight his contribution is, I think, important. And so there's a sort of a sheet here for students to fill up, and there's a little tab at the bottom that that introduces Jabir ibn Hayyan to the students. So we had different levels of difficulty, so an easy one, a medium one, and a harder one. And then there was obviously the answers for the teachers as well. So all of these resources are posted on the School for Physical and Chemical Sciences outreach pages. They are freely available to teachers to use, and indeed have been used by them. And I'll show you some of the responses we received from teachers in a minute. Oh, well, actually now. So these resources at the last count have been sourced by about 70 different teachers from around the country. Obviously, the main concentration is around London and the Southeast, because that's where most of my contacts are, and we were able to push these resources out to them. This comment was quite common. So pupils were surprised by the acknowledgement of contributions made by people of colour and welcomed them. They were inspired. As at Key Stage 3 and 4 curriculum, their textbooks do not mention any contributions by BAME scientists. We were also able to put this stuff out on social media. So we had a number of responses. So, you know, these resources are now out there, and we hope that more and more teachers will actually make use of them. So we hope that this project will hopefully inspire a new generation that are more informed about the more diverse contributions to chemistry, that it's not monolithic, that these contributions will provide role models, a sense of belonging, and perhaps reduce eventually the attainment gaps. If I go back to the donut chart I showed you at the beginning, hopefully will inspire students from minorities to leadership roles beyond the first degree. They stay on and do postgraduate studies, stay on and do research and become leading researchers, Nobel Prize winners, leading members of companies, etc. in this country. We hope that this will combat racism and feelings of superiority and inferiority between different people, and hopefully prevents teenagers from not adopting extremist views. So there's almost like a fatalistic, there's no hope. Let me do something extreme. Let's hope that by trying to have a more equal and equitable society, we can show that there is a way that we can go forward in a balanced way. So what is our future work for? What does our future work entail? So we're hoping to co-create more resources at Key Stage 5. Indeed, Aisha and Isra did some more work this summer. So I've got some more resources to put onto our outreach pages. I'm hoping to extend this to the curriculum within undergraduate chemistry. Our posters, by the way, are also up in our building, which is the Joseph Priestley building. So hopefully those posters will inspire not only students at Key Stage 5 in schools and colleges, but also our own undergraduates. We've also run poster competitions for our undergraduates and also for Year 12 students. So asking them to do the research, so they find out from themselves about these contributions. So by giving students, for example, a particular continent to look at and search out overlooked scientists and producing posters. The top image shows a poster exhibition by Year 12 students at the community festivals, which was held in person in Stepney Green Park this year. We've tried to disseminate our work through an article which is currently under review in the Journal of Chemical Education. We're hoping to undertake some longitudinal studies where we can show that students using these resources or the teachers using these resources with their students will inspire students to aim higher and reduce these attainment gaps. And obviously our long-term aim is to lobby the government to try and make the national curriculum more inclusive. I think we've got a bit of trouble with the colour of the current government. I think they're probably quite impervious, but at least they have this levelling up agenda. So they're trying to make the north of the country more equal with the south. And part of that is to try and have a more inclusive history curriculum. And I would argue that that more inclusive curriculum should be extended across all subjects. So this is sort of my penultimate slide. It's a call to action, really. This is Emma Watson, who said solidarity is a verb. Behind her is actually my second dedication for this talk, which is the Palestinian people, who I think are suffering a lot under occupation. Indeed, Nelson Mandela said, we know too that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. So I'd like to also dedicate that this talk to them as well. As a university, we are aiming by our 2030 strategy to be the most inclusive university of its kind anywhere. I would suggest we've got a long way to go. I know the people who come and clean my office on a daily basis. If you then look at the background, the heritage of our students, and then you work your way to the center of the college, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but this was actually said at a conference, not by me, but by somebody else who is from the host community. But she said, as you go to the center of power, it becomes maler, paler, and perhaps staler. So I'm going to leave it as that. I maybe agree with part of that, maybe not all of it. What I would say, though, is that let's try and give equal opportunities to everybody. So some people are privileged in having the ladder that will take them to the top of the tree to pick up the juiciest apples. Let's give everybody that ladder so the opportunities are equal for all, not that some people without the ladder have to just have the windfalls or the damaged apples at the bottom of the tree. So I think increasingly within chemistry, at least, the Royal Society of Chemistry has recognised the importance of this work. Chemical industry are realising the importance of this. This is an article in the BBC News from the 21st of September. So firms are joining forces to combat racism in chemistry, which basically means that people from especially from an Afro-Caribbean or let's say again, I don't like using the word white, but I have to use it. Again, let's say from a BAME community, seem to be disadvantaged when it comes to internships, placements, and indeed jobs. And firms are trying to combine forces to combat this. So let's try and make these opportunities fairer for all. I leave you with this image. I don't know if you recognize this. You have to be of a certain age to recognize this person and where he is. This is actually John Stephen Akhawari, Tanzanian marathon runner from the 1968 Summer Olympics in Mexico. Now, you may notice in the image, he's got a bandage across his right leg. So halfway around the marathon, he actually fell, injured himself quite badly, and had to be bandaged up. This is him at the finish line. Now, when he was asked, why did you bother finishing maybe hours after everybody else? He said, my country didn't send me 5,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish the race. So I'll leave you with that thought. And I thank you for your attendance. Thank you very much for attending today. I'd like to obviously acknowledge my co-contributors to this project, Aisha and Israt Zahan Chowdhury, who are the two students, and Dr. Leslie Howell, who's been my co-academic in driving this project forward. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tipu, for an amazing, absolutely amazing presentation. What a way to kick off our first Lunch and Learn. I absolutely loved the beginning where you dedicated your talk to Chris Cover. I loved how inclusive you were with your language, how it was a mix of chemistry and history. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it so much. And I think it's so thought-provoking in terms of what more we could be doing, especially around a sense of belonging and progression, and how we need to be thinking about the future yeah, our future and what the future of chemistry and education looks like. I remember a few years ago, I had what I realised now was a privilege to meet Professor Robert Mackay at the University of Nottingham, not even really realising at the time that he was the only Black professor in chemistry in the UK, which is an absolute crazy thought. I now invite everyone to share their reflections and ask TP any questions they have. But yeah, I just like to thank you once again for an amazing lunch and learn.
Thank you very much.
Alex has left a lovely comment. May I?
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Just a quick one from me. Thank you so much, Tipu. I'm not a scientist by trade, so yeah, you brought everything to life in a very transparent, accessible way that anyone from any academic discipline and background could relate to. I've really enjoyed listening to you and seeing you put your style and stamp on the content as well. So thank you so much for presenting your hard work and that of your colleagues. We're very lucky to have you here at Queen Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That's very kind of you. That's nice comments and thoughts. Thank you. I feel honoured.
Oh, Katerina? Oh, you're just on mute,
Katerina.
Classic. I'm sorry. If you forgive me, Tifu, I'll be annoying in a second way as well, and do a sort of question comment rolled into one. First of all, thank you very much for many light bulb moments. I've been waiting to be able to say that. But truly, I think a lot of I sort of feel like I've sort of looked into representation and history and not so much into science maybe, and even so a lot of the names that you mentioned I hadn't heard before, which just goes to make your point really, really beautifully. I also really wanted to say thanks for sharing your own personal background and for making that direct connection to the present. I think it's very easy to look at slavery and pretend that it's in the past and we're still profiting from it now, which is the case with so many injustices. So I think you made a really good point and a very clear link to our present as a university and as people as well. And obviously you gave a lot of ideas as well, but to move us on to a question, what really stuck with me was sort of your comment of you have to see it to be it. If there's only sort of one Black professor in the whole of the UK and no Nobel Prize winners, sort of where's the inspiration? You've obviously talked about your work with students, and I was wondering whether there's sort of anything else that you can see either the university or us as individuals doing to help with representation and that attainment gap. I was thinking mentoring might be something. I'm also thinking sort of from my personal experience as a parent, I'm going to pop a children's book about sort of scientists, which has BAME female representation in the chat. But if there's anything else that you didn't have time for in the talk, which I realized was very comprehensive, so you might just say, I've said everything I have to say, and we have to go away and think further now for ourselves. And I mean, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem, Katharina. I mean, I can't add very much. I mean, I can only give my own personal reflections. I mean, as I said in my talk, I was always brought up in British schools, and I'm actually quite a shy person, and I don't like giving these types of talks because I felt a severe lack of belonging when I was being brought up, being perhaps the only Asian in a classroom of other people who are not from a minority background. I still remember when after Cyprus we came to the UK and basically we didn't know anybody, and my father's colleague said, look, on your salary you probably can't afford a house in London, come to Maidstone where I am, the schools are good and the houses are relatively cheap. So we went to Maidstone, and 72 to 82 I was in Maidstone. Again, it was a very English town. I was one, I think, of 3 Asians at school. So that's right through from the 4th year primary, right through to A level. I was, I felt very strange. And obviously at that time, I think people are a bit more PC now, but you would get the whole works in terms of the fact you were different. And so I still remember I think at that time, my mum used to wear a traditional Indian sari, which is a long dress. I used to be embarrassed to walk with her when we walked down the street. I used to be like, several paces ahead. It was a very strange feeling. I felt very different. I felt very isolated. And it was only when I went to university and started meeting people like myself that I could actually feel a sense of belonging, that I belong somewhere. So it was actually quite difficult. But if I'd perhaps known about, if my teachers had actually highlighted, some contributions of some BAME scientists or BAME contributions, perhaps that would have eased me a little bit. But I was extremely immature when I got to university. Now, most people were quite mature. I was very immature. And I think hopefully especially in London, obviously that's changed a lot in the last 20 or 30 years, because the whole of London especially has become very cosmopolitan, and obviously the UK has as well. But it was very, very difficult. And I don't know if anybody from a BAME background have similar experiences. So, I don't want any other child to be in that situation where they're feeling this isolation and not knowing, where do I belong? So I don't know how we can address that. I bet there are probably still pockets of the country where there are kids in very isolated situations, and obviously I don't know how we can identify them and how we can help them.
Thank you. Thanks very much for sharing that, and what a motivation, that same difficulty hasn't got to be faced again. Yeah, that's really touching. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh,
Samantha's got a hand up.
Hi there. I'm actually an external person joining, so I work for the Salters Institute, which is a charity that works on chemistry education. I saw this on LinkedIn because I'm a previous Queen Mary employee from a couple of years ago. So it's really great to come along and hear about the work that you're doing, Tipu. I think we may have emailed before,
Okay.
but I was wondering if there was a percentage for the A-level students and kind of their background, if that data's available, because obviously you see the drop-off at undergraduate, postgraduate and professor, and whether there's kind of a difference from Key Stage 5 into undergraduate. And you've obviously talked about your future work, which is great, and kind of hopefully lobbying to change the national curriculum, which I think it probably needs a bit of a shake-up in all areas. But whether there's any work that could be done for kind of Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 before they're making those choices in terms of post 16, because obviously if you don't do chemistry at A-level, you're unlikely to then go and pursue that kind of later on for undergraduates.
Yeah, I mean, I think so you're from the just remind me again.
Salters Institute.
It's Salters. So Salters,
Yeah.
I think, have recognised obviously the importance of working with younger age groups. So I think Salters Festival of Chemistry, I think, is targeted at year 8s, and then I think more recently at year 9s. And I think this is where obviously introduction to science is important, because I think at that age kids are quite can be influenced, and obviously once they reach A-level, it's probably too late. So I think there is a recognition that to work with the early years students is really important. Obviously, we'd like to change the national curriculum at all years, including the younger age group as well. But it'll take time, and obviously it requires probably more effort than we can do at Queen Mary. There are obviously lots of inclusive initiatives around the country, in other universities as well. There's lots of universities recognizing the importance of a inclusive national framework in terms of the curriculum. And I guess this will either be initiated by schools, through schools themselves, and by external factors as well. But I agree with you. It should really start at a much younger age. And I think the Salters Institute are trying to do their best as well in this area. So thank you for your contributions as well.
That's right. Thank you.
I think Michael has his hand up as well.
Thanks, Leah. I did have a quick question. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you,
I think
Michael.
from a personal perspective, I must admit, when I saw the invite and I see the word chemistry, that's something that's always intimidated me a little bit, but I really do enjoy the presentation, so thank you very much. I'm a relatively new member of staff at Queen Mary. I've been here for a few months, so I had a question for you, which was, do you feel sort of in your experience that we're having enough conversations about how academics within the institution can make their curriculum, their teaching more inclusive, and from your experience, what should we be doing as a university to ensure more conversations about this are happening?
So there is, I think, a college-wide commitment to try and have this inclusive agenda or inclusive framework. It's one of the 2030 strategies. And that's quite broad, you know, it's not just the curriculum, but it's also assessment and everything else. I think there should be more conversations within departments, within schools, within faculties. Obviously, I think the problem is that staff are quite resistant to change. Let's just admit it. And they feel that perhaps a lot of staff probably feel this is not a really important area or an area that I should give a priority to. So what I would suggest, there needs to be a champion within a department who actually leads on this, who can make it easy for staff by actually providing the resources. So the same way that we've done for schools, within your particular subject area, if you can find a champion, perhaps yourself, who can lead on this. For example, within CASE, which is the Science and Engineering Centre for Inclusive Curriculum, for example, within maths, they've got their PhD students who've found out lots of contributions from, let's say it again, non-white Western males, their contribution to maths, and they've actually had a series of seminars. I think there's one actually tomorrow. So it needs a champion to actually lead on this, to take it forward, and then make it easy, and perhaps, as somebody said, in baby steps for the rest of the staff to actually follow and to grab onto this. I think staff will be persuasive, but we need to make the path easy for them and point out, what the advantages would be, that there is actually an injustice here that needs to be corrected, but make it easy for them to include these examples within their existing teaching, if that's possible. So that's all I can suggest at this stage, I'm afraid. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thanks very much. It's always really helpful to hear your insights. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm not sure if there are any other questions or reflections for Tipu at all. Go take the silence and the lack of interaction as a no. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Tipu again one last time for an absolutely amazing first lunch and learn. Yeah, your insights were absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone who has attended has too. So thank you very much. For those of you attending, as I said, it's one of our first of a series of lunch and learns, and so we'll have another one next week, which is looking at insights into intersectionality in engineering, which is very exciting. But yes, once again, I'd like everyone to take an opportunity to quickly thank Tipu for today's talk.
Thank you very much, and thank you for arranging this and for everybody attending. As I said, it's very, very, very busy time of the year, so thanks very much. Your attendance and appreciation are very much appreciated. Thank you.